Donald Trump just shared a secret with his son, one so powerful it could change his life forever. What did he say? Let's find out.
Barron Trump never asked to inherit a name, but one quiet night his father calls him into a room no one enters. There, he hands him a tape never played, a journal never read, and a secret about a brother the world forgot. What follows isn't about politics. It's about a broken legacy, a buried truth, and the moment a father finally stops performing to tell his son who he really is. It changes everything, not with noise, but with silence. The sun was setting over Palm Beach, casting gold across the surface of the private pool. The windows of Mar-a-Lago caught the light, glowing like the place was on fire, even though the house itself was hushed. Even in stillness, that house always seemed to be holding its breath. Barron Trump moved through it quietly, tall, reserved, a ghost in the corners of the chandeliered rooms. He didn't walk like someone who belonged there. He walked like someone trying not to disturb the illusion. At 19, Barron was no longer the awkward kid the world had once speculated about. He was lean, sharp-featured, more like his mother than his father. His voice, when he chose to use it, was deep and patient, measured in a way that didn't come from media training, but from watching his life unfold through a two-way mirror. He didn't post, didn't argue, didn't play the game. He just watched. And tonight, he was watching his father eat dinner alone at the long mahogany table. Donald Trump didn't like silence. He filled it like a general fills a parade ground. But lately he'd been quieter, slower, and tonight he looked up and said something Barron never expected. "Stay a minute." Barron blinked. "Sure." He sat down across from the man the world never stopped looking at. The room smelled faintly of scotch and polished wood. The sound of silverware against china echoed like it didn't belong there. Donald didn't look up, just cut another piece of steak and said quietly, "Do you know where your name came from?" Barron tilted his head like, "Why you named me that?" Donald nodded. "I had an alias, used it when I wanted privacy. John Barron, used to call reporters pretending to be someone else." He smiled faintly. "They always believed me." Barron said nothing. Donald went on, "I like the name. Sounded clean, strong, someone you couldn't ignore." He finally looked up. "But you're not like that, are you?" Barron didn't flinch. "Do you want me to be?" Donald sat back. "No," he said, surprising them both. I think I'm tired of people trying to be someone they're not." A silence passed between them, not awkward, just wide. Then Donald stood. "Come with me." Barron hesitated, not because he didn't want to, but because it had never happened before. His father didn't invite people in. He summoned them or sent others in his place. But tonight he motioned for Barron to follow. They walked down a narrow hallway, past a portrait room, past a mirrored corridor where staff rarely stepped. At the far end was a small door with a keypad. Donald punched in a code. The lock clicked. He opened the door and let Barron in. The room was simple, no gold, no velvet, just a heavy desk, a bookshelf, a file cabinet, and in the corner, a tape player, cassette, ancient. Barron looked around, confused. Donald reached into the drawer and pulled something out. A box, inside an old photograph, a letter, and a tape. He held the photo out to Barron, a young man in a pilot's jacket, smiling, wind-blown hair, soft eyes. "That's Freddie," Donald said quietly. Barron frowned. "Who?" Donald's voice dropped. "My older brother." Barron froze. His father rarely spoke of family, of anything before the buildings and cameras, but now he looked away toward a dust-covered photo on the shelf. "He died before you were born. He drank himself to death." Donald ran a hand over his face. He didn't want to be part of the business, wanted to fly planes, be free. A pause. Then I mocked him for it. Barron sat down slowly. The room felt heavier now, like something unburied. He looked at the tape. What's on it? Donald hesitated. I don't know. He mailed it to me once, years before he died. I never listened to it. Barron looked at him. Why not? A long silence. Because I already knew what he'd say. That night after Barron went to bed, he lay awake staring at the ceiling. He could still see his father standing in that room, holding the letter like it weighed more than any lawsuit, any scandal, any flag. For the first time, Barron saw him not as a wall of sound, but as a man who had once loved someone who didn't want to be him, and lost him. He sat up, wrote a note on a piece of hotel stationery. I want to hear the tape with you. He slipped it under the door of the small room where Donald often stayed when he wanted no press, then went back to bed and waited for a knock. Morning came slowly. Outside, the Mar-a-Lago estate shimmered with the same polished elegance it always had. Staff walked quietly through the halls, sunlight broke through the high-arched windows, the headlines screamed somewhere else, but inside the room at the end of the hallway, the one few knew existed, the world was still. Donald Trump sat in a worn leather chair, arms crossed. The cassette tape was already in the player. He hadn't pressed play, not yet. The envelope from Barron, his son's note, sat folded in his lap. I want to hear the tape with you. A strange sentence, not for him, not against him, just with. It made his throat feel tight. He hadn't expected that. A knock. He looked up, the door creaked open, and Barron entered quietly. No fanfare, no entourage, no cameras, just a son and a father in a room with a voice neither of them had heard in decades. Ready? Barron asked. Donald hesitated, then reached forward and pressed play. There was a crackle, then silence, then a voice, soft, measured, a touch of mischief buried beneath the tone. Hey, Donnie, the room froze. I figured you'd never listen to this, but I'm recording it anyway. You were always better at headlines than I was. You had the spark, the swagger. You filled rooms I didn't want to. I liked the quiet. I liked the sky. Donald closed his eyes. The voice was like a ghost, not haunting, but familiar in a way that split him open. I know you think I gave up. Maybe I did, but not the way you think. I didn't die because I was weak. I died because I couldn't make peace with pretending, and I see you now on television, in the papers, and I just keep wondering if you remember who we were before we pick sides. Barron glanced sideways at his father. Donald was still, hands folded tight, eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in a kind of aching focus. Freddie continued, I don't want anything from you. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to tell someone the truth one day, not the truth about me, not about the company, not even about Dad, the truth about you. The tape clicked. Side A ended. No one moved. Then Donald stood up, walked slowly to the shelf, picked up the letter Freddie had sent with the tape. It was still sealed. He held it to his chest for a moment, then handed it to Barron. You read it. Barron hesitated. Are you sure? Donald nodded. Barron opened it. Inside, a short paragraph, handwritten, no signature. If you're reading this, then you're the only person who can break the loop. I lived like I didn't matter. You lived like you had to matter to everyone. We were both wrong. The truth is simple. You mattered even when you were quiet. Barron looked up. I think he wanted you to tell that to someone. Donald didn't speak. He looked older in that moment, not in years, but in weight. Finally, he said, I've told a lot of people a lot of things, never told anyone that. Barron folded the letter, held it for a second, then looked directly at him. "Tell me." Donald sat down again, took a breath. "I was afraid I'd lose myself if I ever stopped performing." Baron didn't flinch, so Donald continued, "The world doesn't give you credit for being quiet. They walk past you. They forget you. I wasn't going to let them forget me, but Freddie, he didn't care if people forgot him. He just wanted to be free, and I punished him for that, for being what I couldn't be." The words weren't emotional. They were something deeper, raw, unpolished, rare. Baron leaned forward. "You were just scared, weren't you?" Donald blinked hard, then whispered, "Every day." The room remained still after the tape ended. No words, no movement, just a father and son sitting in a room where something old had finally spoken. Donald stood slowly and walked to the window. His reflection stared back at him, older, grayer, sharper than he remembered. He spoke softly. "I never told anyone about that room, not even your mother." Baron nodded, still seated. "Why now?" Donald didn't answer at first. Then he turned around. "Because for the first time, I don't feel like I'm hiding behind myself when I talk to you." He opened a drawer, pulled out something wrapped in a faded cloth, laid it gently on the table, unwrapped it. Inside was a leather-bound journal, small, old, the spine barely held together. On the front, F.T. Frederick Trump. Donald touched the cover with his fingers slowly. "Freddie wrote this when he was in rehab. I visited him once. He gave it to me. I never opened it." He paused. "I was afraid of what I'd find." Baron reached forward but stopped. "Are you ready now?" Donald looked at him, eyes damp but not broken, just open, not alone. They opened the journal together. Page by page, it wasn't angry, it wasn't sad. It was full of moments, quiet ones, observations, fears, memories. "Donnie always wanted to be bigger than the room. I just wanted to sit still and breathe without someone asking why." He laughs like a hammer. I laugh like a window creaking, but I think we both wanted the same thing, to not be alone. Halfway through the journal, one page was different, written in larger handwriting, more rushed. "If I don't make it, give this to someone who still has a chance to choose. Don't give it to someone who wants the world. Give it to someone who wants to feel what's real inside it." Donald closed the journal gently, looked at Baron. "That's you." Baron was quiet for a long time, then said, almost whispering, "Is that why you brought me in here?" Donald nodded. "I didn't want to give you a brand or a company or a last name. I wanted to give you this before the world told you what you had to be." Outside, it began to rain, slow, warm, southern rain, the kind that didn't demand shelter, only attention. Donald sat back down, looked at his son, not through the lens of a dynasty, but through something much older, a father reaching across time. "He wasn't weak, you know." Baron nodded. "I know. And you're not silent because you're scared." Baron looked at him. "I'm silent because I don't want to speak someone else's words." Donald exhaled deeply, then said, "That's braver than anything I've ever done." That night, Donald didn't watch the news. He didn't post, didn't take a call. He sat alone in the old room, lights low, the tape rewound, the journal beside him, and whispered, "Freddie?" A pause. "You were right. He was the one to give it to." For 3 days, Baron barely spoke, not out of rebellion, not out of shock, but out of reverence. He carried the journal with him carefully, like it might vanish if dropped too quickly. He didn't open it in public, didn't mention it when people asked what he was reading. He kept it close, like a compass he didn't yet know how to use. At night, he sat outside on the veranda, earbuds in, pretending to listen to music. He wasn't. He was thinking about the voice on the tape, the cracked gentleness in Freddie's words, the rare tremble in his father's. It felt like being handed a broken violin and told it still had music in it. He just didn't know how to play yet. Donald hadn't said much since the day they listened. He didn't return to the room with the tape. He didn't bring up the journal, but something in him shifted, subtle but real. He didn't speak in slogans that week, didn't bark orders, didn't overtalk. He lingered longer in doorways. He waited a second longer before responding. Once at breakfast, he asked Barron a question without interrupting halfway through the answer. Barron noticed, and maybe that was enough. On the fourth morning, Barron opened the journal again. This time he flipped to the back and found a page folded in half. When he opened it, it read, "If someone ever tells you that you have to be loud to be strong, give them silence that doesn't back down. If they tell you men don't feel, show them a bruise you didn't hide. And if they hand you a legacy covered in gold, ask them what part of it bleeds." Barron read it twice, then closed the journal and walked downstairs. His father was in the study, reading, not tweeting. Barron leaned against the doorframe. "Can I ask you something?" Donald looked up. "Anything." Barron held up the journal. "Did he ever tell you he loved you?" Donald hesitated, then shook his head. "No, but I think he did in the way he looked at me when I was trying to win." Barron stepped inside. "Do you know the last time you looked at me that way?" A silence. Then Donald set the paper down, stood, and walked around the desk, looked his son in the eye. "I'm looking at you that way now." It wasn't emotional. There were no tears, but something passed between them, something that didn't have to be loud to be real. Barron nodded and left the journal on the desk. "You can finish it. I've memorized my part." That night, Donald opened it not like a book, but like a mirror. He read every word his brother had written, the small ones, the angry ones, the beautiful, broken, unfinished ones. He turned to the last page and wrote something for the first time in years. "Freddie, thank you. You gave me something my billions never could, a second chance to be honest, to be still, to be a father. I'll try to get it right this time." The next morning, Barron found a slip of paper slid under his door, his name written in large, familiar handwriting. Inside was one sentence. "Let's go somewhere quiet today, just us." They drove with no Secret Service for the first time in months, took back roads, ended up at a small beach Donald hadn't visited since he was a teenager. No press, no noise, just wind and water. They walked side by side, not talking much, just being. Donald picked up a stone, stared at it for a while, then tossed it into the waves. "You know, the ocean's the only thing that ever made me feel small, and I think that's why I avoided it for so long." Barron crouched down, watching the tide pull back. "But small doesn't mean weak." Donald turned toward him. "No, it means honest." As the tide rolled back in, Barron did something he'd never done before. He reached over and placed a hand on his father's shoulder, not as a gesture of pity, not as a son forgiving his father, but as a man saying, "I see you." And Donald didn't say a word, just placed his hand on top of his son's, and they watched the waves together. 3 months later, the estate was quiet again, not because the media had stopped chasing them, but because they had stopped running. The story hadn't broken. There were no leaks, no press found out about the room at the end of the hallway, or the tape, or the journal. The silence held because some things, Barron now understood, aren't meant to be shared with everyone, just with the ones who will carry it. He still had the letter, the one Freddie wrote. He kept it folded in his wallet beside an old photo of his mother and a small drawing from childhood, something he once made on the back of a campaign flyer, a stick figure alone holding a balloon labeled Me. He didn't know why he'd kept it all those years until now. Now he understood. Donald didn't talk about Freddie after that week, not directly, but every so often Barron noticed him do something unusual. A full minute of silence before speaking in an interview, a pause before correcting someone, a single sentence to an aide, "Let's wait." Once during a meeting with former advisors, someone made a crack about Barron's quietness. Donald didn't defend him. He didn't have to. He just said calmly, "Still water reflects the sky better." The room went silent, and something in Donald's voice made sure it stayed that way. On the evening of Barron's 20th birthday, Donald called him outside. The sunset was low and gold, the clouds hung like heavy silk above the sea. They stood near the edge of the garden path, no guards, no cameras, just them. Donald reached into his coat and pulled something out, the journal, worn, soft, pages marked. He handed it to Barron. "I added something, just one page." Barron opened it in the back, written in bold, careful handwriting. "To my son, I've built towers, brands, a name that may outlive us both. But this is the first thing I ever built that was just for you, not to impress you, not to teach you, just to show you that I knew, finally, that being your father mattered more than any crowd I ever stood in front of. I may not have many days left to rewrite history, but I have enough time to tell you the truth. I am proud of the man you are becoming, because you are building quietly, and that takes more strength than I ever had." Barron closed the journal slowly, held it against his chest, then said quietly, "Thank you for not leaving this buried." Donald nodded. "Thank you for asking for it." Later that night, Barron sat alone on the balcony, watching the stars blink into being. He wasn't sure what his future looked like. He didn't want the spotlight, didn't want to inherit the machinery of empire, but he now held something far more precious than power. He held a choice, a real one, and somewhere in that night a decision came to him, not in thunder, but in peace. He would not build louder, he would build slower, he would listen first, he would speak when it mattered, and he would be the first Trump to be remembered, not for the noise he made, but for the silence he kept. Across the house, Donald sat in the study, eyes closed. The journal was gone now, passed on, but in its place on his desk sat a single photo, Freddie smiling, and beside it a recent one of Barron standing by the sea. Donald looked between them, then whispered to himself, "The loop is broken.